Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear students, the current session focuses on issues and struggle for recognition that English language had to face during the period from 1500 to 1650. Well, my dear students, I hope and expect that by the end of the session, you will be able to understand what were the issues with reference to its recognition that English language had to face. Were there any competitions? What was the situation that the language had to face for surviving through the times? Well, my dear students, till this time, English had attained an established position as a language of popular literature. You know, after the invention of printing press, a lot of literature, especially, this was the time of the rise of the kind of literature that you would call romances, that they were written in English language, and the new genre of novel, had started, taking its form and shape. However, that is just one side of the picture. There was a strong tradition that still sanctioned the use of Latin. There were a lot of people, the masses, English was popular amongst a bigger group of people. Comparatively lesser number of people favored Latin, but the people who favored Latin, they had a very strong tradition behind that, because Latin was considered to be the language of learning, of sophistication, of scholarship. This was also a time that we call Renaissance. The Renaissance was the time of the revival of learning. Renaissance is a period that is characterized with the desire and with the keenness to learn. People were keen to learn and to explore the old, civilizations, cultures, languages, and knowledge. So the records of Greek civilization were once more available, and of course, this time they were available to the masses. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is Latin because of its writing tradition, and Greek and Latin both because, of course, of the socio-cultural impact of Renaissance. These were the languages that were giving a tough competition to English language. In fact, Latin and Greek languages were considered to be a key to the world's knowledge. My dear students, I'd like you to think of the times in the subcontinent when Persian was considered to be the language of the learned. It was considered to be a sign of being sophisticated. It was associated with the court, and all the educated and learned people would have, perfect knowledge of Persian, whereas masses did not know Persian much. In the same way, Latin and Greek languages were the languages of the scholars, of the learned class, and they were a source of all the knowledge that Renaissance brought back. Thus, all the highly esteemed poetry, oratory, philosophy, and in fact, every type of, knowledge in the times was, available in these two languages. The natural result, as I said earlier, English language had to face this competition. If English wanted to survive, if English wanted to be recognized, it had to take that competition. Also, in the background, there was, a history of English language. Before these times, English language had never ever been the language of the upper class. It was not ever taken as a very sophisticated language. It was considered to be a vulgar tongue. Here I'm using the vulgar means in the sense of, very common or very cheap, not in the sense of the word as we use it today. It was also considered to be immature. Well, being one of the modern languages, it was, when we look at it in comparison with the classicals, the classic languages, the Latin and Greek languages, it was comparatively considered to be immature. Its resources, the streams that were feeding it, they were considered to be very, very limited. And it was also thought by the scholars and the writers and the learned people of the times that it did not have the capacity to express abstract ideas. Well, my dear students, in all this situation, when English was fighting for recognition, there were many supporters of English language. I would name one particular person here, Richard Mulcaster, who was a headmaster of Merchant Taylor's School. He was a great supporter of English language. And actually, he was the man who tried to convince the authorities and people, and who tried to contribute as much he could to promote English and to bring recognition and stability to it. I am quoting his words here. And by the way, as we would be going through it, you would notice that because what he has written is in the English of the times, there are certain words that have different spellings. However, for example, tongue. But, they would be comparatively easier for you to read as compared to the Middle or Old English language, of course. So he says, but why not all in English? A tongue of itself, both deep in conceit and frank in delivery. I do not think that any language, please notice the spellings, I do not think that any language, be it whatsoever, is better able to utter all arguments, either with more pith or greater plainness. Then our English tongue is, if the English utterer be as skillful in the matter which he is to utter as the foreign utterer is. Notice very interesting spellings we find here of foreign as well. And he continues, for it is not indeed, and notice the spellings again of indeed, for it is not indeed a marvelous bondage to become servants to one tongue for learning's sake the most of our time, with loss of most time, whereas we may have the very same treasure in our own tongue, with the gain of most time. Our own bearing the joyful title of our liberty and freedom, the Latin tongue remembering us of our thraldom and bondage. And finally, what he says, this is very important, my dear students. And I think this voices the feelings of people of the times. He says, I love Rome, but London better. He says, I love Rome, but London better. I favor Italy, but England more. I honor the Latin, but I worship the English. So, my dear students, these were very strong words. These were those influential words that actually voiced the feelings and emotions and the thoughts of the common people. In fact, the real force behind the use of English and the real force behind the need and desire for its recognition was coming from certain social aspects. And there are three important points related to that I would point out. A, it was a popular demand. People wanted it. Masses wanted it. Masses had been using it for quite a long time now. Masses now were in more powerful situation. This was the time when they were rising up, so they wanted it to be used. The second point is all sorts of men in practical life wanted it. Latin and Greek and French languages were not considered to be suitable enough for the changing times and for the practical life. And the third aspect of it was that in order to share the fruits of Renaissance with the common people, to spread the knowledge that came through Renaissance, there was the need for a vehicle of language that these people would be able to understand. And English suited the purpose the best.